And we are live. Hello, everyone. This is Dwight Woods, the Jeet Kune Rebel. Welcome to the Jeet Kune Dialogues, episode number 276. And this is an Ask Me Anything with yours truly. As you're logging in, if you'd be kind enough to say where you're logging in from, hit the like button and feel free to continue doing so throughout the dialogue. If you're catching the simulcast over on the YouTube, please be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell as well. But of course, the best thing you can do is to share this video and spread word about the Jeet Kune dialogues. So before we get into today's AMA, actually, let me make sure that we got no audio problems and what have you. Mark Black is here. Mark Black beat Terry Valor by 1 minute. Terry Valor, it sucks to grow old, doesn't it? These young punks are coming in and running the show. All right, give me a thumbs up, Mark, Terry, just so I know the audio is in place, and we will carry on, as they famously say. Get rid of that. Okay. Yes, Mark, you're the new champion. All right. Okay. So I wanted to mention this stuff. I think I've done two of them now. Yeah, I've done two, and it's these quotes that I have taken from a series of articles that I wrote 7 years ago, I think it was, right? And actually, I've been going through the series and taking a look at the quotes and what have you, right? So I've been putting this stuff up, and the reactions to them have been quite interesting, quite spectacular, right? I must be getting real good at putting up stuff that people find engaging, right? And so if you haven't seen any of those, go to my page here on Facebook, or they're over on the I Love Jeet Kune page as well, and just see the kind of engagement that we're getting from this series that I'm putting out. But to get to today's program, I invited anybody who had a question about anything in the JKD world, because I'm not qualified to talk about anything outside of the JKD world. Okay, so don't ask me. Actually, that's not true, right? But so let's get into it. And of course, usually there's the regular stuff, right? There people will be up in arms against each other over the original versus concepts, whatever. In fact, the series of articles that I wrote, the title of it, because I'm not very creative, is Jeet Kune original versus concepts versus Oakland versus Chinatown, etc. Right? But remember, this is from 7 years ago. For some reason, I want to think that I started writing them even earlier, but I didn't. The original the writing articles, that started in 2008, 15 years ago. And I wrote articles for my newsletter for 8 years nonstop. But this series of articles is actually from the last year that I wrote them, which was 2016. Anyhow, so original versus concepts is still an ongoing thing. Grappling is still an ongoing thing. Technical structure and what have you, all these things, right? So one of the questions came from David was, what is your opinion on the idea of original JKD that supposedly had no grappling techniques? Now, this was an interesting one because David said that there is a video of Bruce Lee with Jean LaBelle, and that it was like training. And I was very intrigued by that, because I had never heard of an actual training video between the two. But apparently it was a reference to the film clip of Jean LaBelle and Bruce Lee in a sequence in the Ironside TV show. So my hopes were dashed. I really thought that there was like underground film of Bruce Lee and Jean LaBelle out there, but apparently not really, right? So it's obvious that Bruce Lee had not just an interest in grappling. He did take the time to make notes in his personal notes on. There's the section in um, the Tao studies on judo, jujitsu, and aikido. So I think it's safe to say that Bruce Lee had an appreciation and an interest in grappling. We know that he and Wally J exchanged ideas, or they knew each other. We know about that Bruce Lee trained grappling with Sato Sensei up in Seattle. We know that he exchanged with Hayward Nishioka in Southern California. Who else in the grappling? Well, the LaBelle stuff, right? We know that there was a note about investigating Pendrak Silat for ground fighting techniques. So I don't think anybody would say that Bruce Lee had no interest in grappling. Now, I can't think of anybody from the what's known as the original JKD group that says that Jeet Kune has absolutely no grappling techniques. If they've said that, then they didn't say it to me, or they didn't say it in a forum where I was privy to anything that was going on. All right. The thing about Bruce Lee and grappling, there's video, I think, of him doing a simple, like on Taki Kimura, I think it is, and it's like a simple lock, and maybe it was even the kick to the face, or I might be confusing that with a thing that he does to Bob Wall in Way of the Dragon. But again, look at the movies. Obviously, Bruce Lee had a certain level of ability in grappling, and was able to even choreograph grappling sequences into his movies. But his actual approach or training in the 60s or 70s couldn't have been much more than the classical approach. And by that, I mean, if you think about it, classical Japanese jiu-jitsu and aikido, they train from like a classical attack type of stuff. Judo trains from being in range and already grabbing onto the gi and then doing your maneuvers. So in my opinion, the idea of, let's call it, entering to trap into grappling, I think that is more of an Inosanto development and not something that was being done in Bruce Lee's time. So I recently was redirected to some Jeet Kune curriculum stuff, and it's very interesting because I can look at it and I can see where it's all recollections of other people and not actually original Bruce Lee stuff, right? And I can see where it's Dan Inosanto material and not at all Bruce Lee material, right? So that's an interesting, and I might talk about that next week on the I Love Jeet Kune broadcast. All right. Okay. So going back to how Bruce Lee would have trained grappling in the 60s and 70s. So it had to be somewhat of a classical approach. The whole ground fighting thing, there's no way that it resembled Brazilian jiu-jitsu and the whole rolling and what have you. When you look, I'm going to tell you something, right? The problem that I see with some of the approaches to Brazilian jiu-jitsu, and if JKD people are integrating the Brazilian jiu-jitsu with everything else that they're doing, I'm not seeing it. Now, I know that Sifu Dan did, because I remember, and this might have been 1996, if memory serves correctly. And we were doing takedowns off single stick and then ground fighting using Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu technique out of single stick. Okay. And not yet, I'm not talking about, one person being in the mount and what have you. No, I'm talking about one person already on the back after the takedown, and then the other person coming in and looking at ways to apply jujitsu ground fighting stuff in that scenario. So I know that Sifudan at one point, he was definitely integrating the Brazilian jiu-jitsu with the empty hand stuff and the weapon stuff that we were doing. The other people out there, if they are, more power to them. If they're not, if all they did was to take on Brazilian jiu-jitsu and adopt it wholesale, but separate it from the other stuff that they're doing, then you're not JKD-izing your BJJ. You're treating, you're behaving like if you're well, you are a BJJ practitioner, but you're behaving just like BJJ schools do, where what they do is BJJ. They don't integrate it with anything else. JKD people are supposed to take everything that they come across and integrate it. Maybe they don't because they're afraid of the whole, oh, you guys keep adding techniques, because that's another issue that came up. All right. When you hear Sifudan say that in the old days the grappling wasn't contested, right? He's talking about what like they do when both people are down on the ground and the BJJ rolling, right? But here's the thing: the element of contestation was there, and I'll tell you how. I tried to find the clip of it, but I can't, and I didn't make a record of which episode of the Joe Rogan podcast it was in, but I remember hearing Joe Rogan say to somebody, and if I could remember who he was talking to, then I might be able to find the clip. If anybody knows of this clip, please let me know. But Joe Rogan was saying to somebody that Helson Gracie gave him the best explanation or the best breakdown of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu that he had ever heard. And it was this: it's like, you do this and I do this against it, and you do that against what I did, and I do this next thing against what you did. The second I heard him say that, I go, well, Joe might not be aware, but that is a training concept that we would call counter for counter. Now, I get the expression counter for counter from Filipino Kali, but it is not just, we were talking about this all week long here in Miami. Counter for counter could be a specified pattern in a specified area of Filipino weapons training, but that would be counter for counter, the pattern. Counter for counter, the training method. Counter for counter, the concept, is a completely different thing. Okay. So I immediately identified what Joe Rogan was talking about as counter for counter. So because for us style hoppers, if Mick Tully's here, he'll get a kick out of that. Because for us style hoppers, we can recognize what goes on in other training systems. Here in Miami, the way that our contestation of grappling is conducted, we use that back and forth principle, and we blend it with the idea of countering before, during, or after. And we also blend it with the idea of not always using grappling to counter grappling. Okay, so three things: the back and forth element of counter for counter, the timing of the counter attack before, during, or after, And then the idea, so it's unlike Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, where they count to grappling with grappling. We don't do that because we're not that steeped in BJJ training, right? So this idea about original Jeet Kune, David, I'm not sure who it is that says that. There's a very good grappling section in Joaquin Marcelo's book, JKD Simplicity. If you haven't seen that, I suggest that you check that out. So if anybody from a particular camp is saying, oh no, there's no grappling in Bruce Lee's Jeet Kune, I would say they don't really know what they're talking about, right? On a final note about this grappling, my opinion is that one reason why Yuri Nakamura's shoot wrestling class in the Sano Academy, why it was so popular, is because he was really good. He could flow very smoothly between striking and grappling, which I think is very much a JKD expression of those two methods of combat. Okay. All right. So that's the question I got about the grappling thing. Right. All right. So let me take a look and see who's here and if anybody has anything to. Terry Valor is paying Facebook notifications. David Amos. Hey, good to see you. David Parker's here. Charles Loudermilk. Mark David Collins. Nice one. Mick Tully, what were you doing? Busy killing Iraqis. Mick, man, I wonder what your head count is up to now. So David Amos is asking, didn't Bruce study a bit of Dumog? I don't know, David, about that. Bruce studying Dumog. I mean, what? I was going to say, what the heck is Dumog? But I mean, I know what you're talking about, right? But no, I don't know anything about Bruce Lee studying a bit of Dumog, as in somebody who was well versed in Filipino grappling methods or what have you. So as far as I know, no. Now I don't know, David, if you're confusing that with the thing about the note that he made about investigating Pencak Silat, right? And if you're not aware of this, in the Tao of Jeet Kune, in the section on grappling, there is a part where you can see that Bruce Lee's sketches are taken from, I think it's Quentin Chambers' Pencak Silat book. So we know, or Don Drager's book, somebody's book, but we know that Bruce Lee definitely did cast his eyes at some point on a particular chapter in a book or a particular section of a book about Pencak Silat. So we can safely say that he was aware of it, right? Mick gave his, Mick, you got your, Mick says I dedicated my black belt to Richard Torres. Oh man. All right. Rodney Hitchcock. Hey, thanks for coming on board. So Mick Tully says, I keep BJJ as a separate entity. Okay. So now I'm not going to argue with Mick Tully over his method or what have you, because I am pretty sure that what Mick is talking about is teaching the art. But in his personal philosophy, I guarantee you that BJJ is not kept separate in terms of fighting system. But if you run a training group or what have you, and you want to teach the BJJ separate from everything else, that's fine. That's quite understandable. There are a lot of people out there in the world who want to study BJJ because it's popular. And very often, more people want to study that which is popular as opposed to something else. So, when people talk today about, well, people don't even know who Bruce Lee is, or people don't even know what Jeet Kune is, but everybody knows what UFC is. Everybody knows what MMA is. Everybody knows what BJJ is. So more people would probably go in that direction, as opposed to being people who are seeking an understanding of an integrated approach to martial arts, right? So Terry says that's why I like no gi. Okay. Mick says, but when you throw a stick into the mix, it's a totally different game. Of course, right? Counter for counter, Carla Carranza. Yeah. Who's that? Right? And then Terry says, same as if you add striking. Okay. Scorch says, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu was touted as the best martial art for MMA until Joe Moreira's embarrassing loss to Paul Varlians at UFC 8. UFC 8, man, that's 30 years ago or so, right, Scorch? Yeah. Mick Tully says, so CSW. Yeah, right. I think combat submission wrestling, which is an outgrowth from Shudo, is a good example of the integration of fighting systems, for sure. Right? The original guys are just pure mugs. Okay. All right. Okay. So let me take one more from before I go on to the stuff I got in advance. No, Gabe, we don't know that Bruce Lee studied Filipino martial arts with Dan Inosanto. No, we don't know that. We might assume that he did because we see him do double stick in Enter the Dragon. We know that Sifu Inosanto, in his own words, right, shared the nunchaku stuff with Bruce Lee, but we don't know that Bruce Lee studied, to use your own word back at you. We don't know that Bruce Lee studied anything in Filipino martial arts with Inosanto. In fact, if you remember, in the Art and Philosophy book, he says that Bruce Lee just ad-libbed Largo Mano. And Bruce Lee said, I don't know what you would call it, but this is how I would approach it. Makes sense to me, right? I'll tell you something that I did hear about is Ted Wong being exposed to stick sparring in Filipino martial arts and saying, well, this makes perfect sense, right? If this is how they showed it more often than not, this makes sense, right? Okay, so going back to what came in before. Well, wait. Actually, okay, so Gabe, I'm up to your question. So Gabe said, if somebody can help, original concepts or contemporary, what's the difference, and is one better than the other? All right, so Gabe Cannon, I'm going to tell you this right now. Asking questions when it comes to JKD, actually asking questions when it comes to martial art in general, and using comparative or superlative terms like better or best, get that out of your system. Right, I imagine you just did that unintentionally because that's how people will ask questions. But the idea of one thing being better, if there was ever anything that was better than something else, then, or if there was ever something that was the best at them, then the only time that you can say that is if somebody somewhere has a perfect record. So I think Mayweather has a perfect record, right? I don't think he's ever been defeated. So if somebody was to say to me, well, at his weight and in his division or in whatever organization he's part of, he is the best, I don't think you can argue that if he's gone up against everybody and nobody has ever beaten him. But other than that, there's no such thing as better or best. But now, in terms of original concept or are contemporary. So I'll deal with contemporary first because I believe that was a name that came out of Paul Vunak's camp, right? They started calling what they were doing contemporary JKD. I don't know why, but maybe it's just to distinguish it, or maybe it's just to express that Jeet Kune, to their way of doing it, has kept up with the times. So it's not original, and it's not just the concepts. It's Jeet Kune for today. I would imagine something like that went into the naming of contemporary. Now, some people will tell you that original Jeet Kune is when you stick to Bruce Lee's technical base, whereas Jeet Kune concepts is when you use that same base, but you add techniques from other arts. Now, that is a gross misstatement and somewhat of a misunderstanding. It's a little bit inaccurate because there's a difference between training in an art for the sole purpose of extracting its essence. Now, we know you'll hear all the time that Bruce Lee researched different arts. And when we hear that, we think that means that Bruce Lee went somewhere and trained in depth for something, because to our way of thinking, that's how you research stuff. But that's not what Bruce Lee did. Bruce Lee read books on art, looked at pictures, if he could find a video of it, perhaps, in terms of actual practice or whatever, there's the delving into judo and what have you. So it's possible, had Bruce Lee lived, he might have continued to do that type of thing, but he might have gone deeper into something. It's very possible. Or it just might be that Bruce Lee was so gifted that he could just read a book, right, and be able to translate what he saw in picture into an ability and what have you. So when you hear Dan and Asano say that nobody could be like Bruce Lee because they didn't have his attributes, yeah, maybe the rest of us weren't able to just look at something and then go translate it into action. We actually had to have some hands-on physical experience in it, right? So the idea about training, for example, in something like Filipino Kali, in something like Boxe Française Savate, in something like Pencak Silat, is to extract its essence. And that's very different from just dabbling in something and adding good-looking techniques to your physical repertoire. That's not at all what Dan and Asano has done. And I know for some of you, I'm just stating the obvious, but apparently the obvious has to be stated and restated as often as possible, because there are some knuckleheads out there who just can't get it. And there's always new people coming along and they are hearing stuff for the first time. So the idea of Dan and Asano adding techniques to Jeet Kune, incorrect. We've shown multiple times, people have explained to knuckleheads, there were different classes at the Asano Academy. So nothing was added to a particular class. When it's the Junfan class, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, or whatever, if you look at that class, everything that's done in that class can be identified as being part of, for lack of a different expression, I'll call it JKD curriculum, right? You don't see in the Jeet Kune class people doing single stick. You don't see people in the Jeet Kune class doing Thai boxing. You don't see people in the Jeet Kune class not using step and slide footwork or slide and step footwork or push shuffle footwork. You don't see them using something else. Okay. So this idea that he added, I'll say it again, and forgive me for those of you who are hearing this for the millionth time. On seminar, Dan Inosanto seeks, sometimes it's based on what he's been asked to teach, or what's in his seminar schedule for that period. Dan Inosanto seeks to expose people to different methodologies from different arts, in the hope that people will see for themselves where there are commonalities in things, and therefore where something can fit in with something else, which is a JKD ideal. Remember that Bruce Lee preached about being able to fit in with your opponent. Okay, so Mick Tully, training in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu all the way up to black belt, and the others like him, they would be much more able to fit in with a jiu-jitsu attack than I would, right? Because they have more knowledge and experience in BJJ than I do. That doesn't mean that I cannot fit in. I'm just saying it might be easier for them to fit in, or more familiar for them, because they have trained it also, right? I have trained to counter it with the little bit of BJJ that I have done, the more other grappling methods that I have done. Okay. But it's still with a view towards being able to counter the grappling. I don't know if I'm making as good sense in that as I can, right? Anyhow, so yes, but this is just to get away from that idea that somebody is adding to Jeet Kune. That is the most ridiculous thing that I've ever seen. Okay, and I know at some point my good friend Richard Torres is going to say, no, that's not true, because Dan Inosanto added Savat for kicking, and then Wing Chun, and then boxing, and then grappling, and he called it the Jeet Kune blend. Yeah, because it was perhaps almost an off-the-cuff remark. Here's how, using the JKD mindset of not being tied to anything in particular, you could go through. Now, it's confusing for some people, because and I do it because I was the skinny Negro Dan Inosanto, right? I tried to be as much like him as I could be when I was younger. And so his propensity for naming stuff, for identifying that this technique comes from this art, I picked up on that also, and I would do the same thing. But for me, it was, and I'm pretty sure for him too, it was just to show exactly what I just said. Hey, look at this thing that's from this place, but look at how well it works with this other thing that's from this other place. And if you don't understand, if you cannot recognize the high-minded idealism of that, okay, showing how this thing from this place in the world can fit in really well with this other thing from this place in the world. If you can't understand that as a martial artist, I wonder if you have a hard time then understanding what people would call a mixed race union. You see, because remember, Dan Inosanto is a high-minded individual. So maybe he's teaching stuff using martial art, but beyond martial art. I wonder. Anyhow, right? So that's that whole thing about adding to Jeet Kune. I mentioned French Savat a few minutes ago. So to wrap this section up, in our curriculum here in Miami Jeet Kune, I trained to white glove level with the late great departed Salem Asli, and there is only one technique from box française that we added, and that is the rear leg side kick, what they would call chassé arrière, right? And I added it simply because the knee motion, the piston motion that Salem would use, turns it into an immensely powerful kick. And so we added that, right? Now, what we integrated into our way of training here in Miami from box française are there are 5 rules for glove drilling: stay in motion, use full extension of the limb, even though sometimes we don't do that one, full extension of the limb, because we're not trying to look like the way Savat wants to look. But anyhow, stay in motion, full extension of limb, use control, respect the range, and go for the touch. And we took those 5 rules, and we applied that to all of our glove drilling. So even in our separate Muay Thai class, we still use glove drilling ideas from box française. Another idea of theirs that we incorporated was that of having a fixed attack, but a freelanced counter. And then one dear to my heart idea was that flexibility is the maintenance of flexibility is a good thing. So Lem actually used to say, those who can do more can do less. So if you can kick high with control, probably easy for you to kick low with control as well. And that is near and dear to my heart. All right. Okay. All right. So let me go back to the live feed. Okay, so Magazine Retriever says, can I put this in there? Speaking of FMA empty hand styles, are there any substantive differences between Pangamut, Pananjakman, and Panantukan? All right, so I'm going to tell you this the way it was explained to me. Pangamut or kamut would be a term used. We could translate that term into empty hands. So just like in empty hands, let's say JKD parlance, right? We have what here in Miami we call the 4 skills of empty-handed combat. So there's kicking, there's punching, there's trapping, there's grappling. The 4 skills of empty-handed combat. So Pangamut would be empty hands. Panantukan is a term that people would translate as Filipino boxing. So just like boxing would be found within the 4 skills of empty-handed combat, Panantukan would be found inside of Pangamut. And then Pananjakman would, as a kicking method, that would also be found within the category of Pangamut. I suspect that terminology and organizational approach might have been Sifu Inasano in a way relating the organization in JKD to the organization of material, right, in JKD to the organization of material in Filipino martial arts, or vice versa. Damn, I don't even know. Right? Okay. Mick says very true on the teaching. Yeah, right. I figured as much. Right. Randy says, I enjoyed my BJ training in the 90s. Then I realized I didn't like rolling around with sweaty dudes. Yeah, me neither. Right? I mean, forget sweaty dudes, sweaty, bad smelling dudes. I'm not into that at all. Right? And, in some of that BJJ stuff, your nose can end up pretty close to some guy's groin. And I'm sorry, man. Some guys don't know nothing about good groin, healthy groin upkeep. Randy, don't make me say that. Right? But yeah, that rolling around stuff, whatever. right? Okay. Hotman Canela says, what state will JKD be in when Guru Dan joins the force? How do you authenticate a JKD instructor? I've had those that claim they're certified in JKD, unable to explain ABC, ABD, PIA, and so on. Okay, all right. So, Hotman, here's the thing, all right? When Sifu Inasano joins the force, I don't know what's going to happen in California, but I suspect that what has been going on in other places in the world, not just places in the US, other places in the world, I suspect that will continue. I also suspect that when it comes to, even though Sifu Inasano's seminar outings have lessened, I mean, he's 87 years old now, and there's this COVID thing. So even though his seminar schedule has decreased, I imagine if people become interested in having JKD instructors travel to teach, then we will see perhaps a rise in that. I, for one, will miss him greatly, So now, how do you authenticate a JKD instructor? I don't know. You could ask them to prove that they are legitimate. You don't, a guy goes, oh yeah, I'm a Jeet Kune instructor. And you go, oh, okay, well then prove it. And they go, well, I don't have to prove it. Then pretty much bogus. I found, do I have them here? I found my associate instructor pristine, pristine condition. I found my associate instructor certificates from 1995. I saw them. They're over in the corner there. I found those the other day. I was like, oh my God, look at this, right? So yeah, if they can't show you a piece of paper and show you a piece of paper from somebody who's known, somebody who's recognized as being a legitimate JKD instructor, so if a guy says, oh, well, here's my certificate, and my certificate comes from James Johnson. And you go, well, who's James Johnson? You go, well, he's a guy that gave me my instructorship in Jeet Kune. Now, man, as an instructor, you got to be able to do better than that. If you ask Randy Ciordia, right? Okay, well, who made you a Jeet Kune instructor? Well, Ron Balicki did. Now, type in the word in Google search, Ron Balicki, you'll find legitimate. So what does that do? That makes Randy Ciordia legitimate. Do it with Mick Tully, right? Do it with Mark Black. Do it with everybody who's on, everybody, Terry Valor, everybody who's on here. Okay? Don't do it with me. Right? So yeah, and so if a guy says I'm certified in JKD, but he cannot explain ABC, ABD, PIA, run away from that guy as quickly as possible. Okay. Nobody, I don't think there's anybody who would sign up for training from a guy who says, I'm a black belt in Kyokushin. And you go, oh, okay, well, can you show me your instructor certificate? No, but you can trust me, I'm a black belt in Kyokushin. No, you'd run away from that guy. So I suggest you run away from somebody who does the same thing with JKD. Unfortunately for JKD, it's gone through such turmoil. Not that Kyokushin hasn't gone through turmoil, if you know what I'm talking about. But JKD has gone through so much turmoil that you have jackasses out there who will tell you that Jeet Kune Do is not a style. It's just a way of thinking. And so since I think in a particular way, since I think like water, and Bruce Lee said, be like water. And so I train like water, and I teach people how to train like water, so that makes me Jeet Kune. Unfortunately, they're knuckleheads who will fall for that kind of gaff, right? No, no. But that's one of the things, one of the reputations, let's say, unfortunately, that JKD has come to enjoy, right? And it's a sad state of affairs, right? Okay, one more from the chat here. Gurudan has always advised illustrating a separate art and championing this, then the integration is then JKD, in my opinion. Yes. Right. Randy says, I have grappling drills and techniques from various arts in my JKD curriculum. Yeah. Right. And that's where, Randy, we'll get into trouble, because if you say it's from different arts, well, then you don't understand that Bruce Lee went beyond styles, as he would call it, right? Because what I've noticed is that when Bruce Lee uses the word style, he's actually referring to arts, right? He's not. So it's like the way I break down martial art categorization or classification. There's Okinawan karate, there's Japanese karate. Within, for example, Okinawan karate, there's the Naha style or lineage, the Shuri style or lineage, and there's one more, but I can't remember. Right? So then Goju-Ryu could be a style in there. In Japanese karate, you have Shotokan, you have Wado. Is Wado Okinawan or Japanese? Now I can't remember. Right? Shito-Ryu, you have Kyokushin, that type of stuff. So those are styles within the art. Kung Fu is the art. Then there's styles of Kung Fu within the art. But when Bruce Lee used the word style, he was talking about what I would call art. So for example, when the guy on the junk heading to Han's Island says, "What's your style?" What he's really saying is, what art do you practice? What art do you train in? So, Randy, if we say that we take it from this art, then there are people who will jump on that and say, see, you guys don't understand. You guys are still trying to define Jeet Kune Do in terms of styles, in terms of arts, and that's because you're in a Sano lineage. They don't understand that to a certain degree, especially, definitely for me, it is somewhat of a cultural appreciation thing. And again, it goes back to an attempt to show how things, and therefore also people, can get along together. It's as simple as that, right? Instead of this, whatever. Okay, all right. So let me go back to what was turned in. Now I forget who said this. What debate? It's kind of simple. You either know or you're in the dark, blinded by the light. That might have been Michael Marcellus Brown, my good friend. Right? Okay, so Cesar, under his nom de guerre, said, do you think the differences between JKD concepts people versus JKD originals, like liberals versus conservatives, quoting what James Bishop has said, are irreconcilable? Okay, so I'm gonna, it's not disagree with James. If I remember correctly, this is what Mr. Bishop said. The Jeet Kune Do original people are the conservatives, and the Jeet Kune Do concepts people are the liberals, right? So conservatives are the people who like things to remain the way they were, and I guess the liberals are the people who have more of a freedom approach. And so because Bruce Lee himself talked so much about freedom and what have you, you might put the two together, especially since the word liberal does come from the Latin root for freedom, right? But here's where I differ. Because conservatives, this is my understanding of conservatives. Conservatives are people who are looking to preserve the original values. So if we put it into a U.S. political context, conservatives are people who are looking to preserve the original values that made America the greatest country in the world. So things like personal responsibility, things like work ethic, things like industriousness, things like creativity. Okay? That's what conservatives are seeking to preserve, the things that make you great. In that regard, the Jeet Kune concepts people would be the conservatives. Okay? The original JKDers would be, I don't know if there would even be a political classification for them. If their idea, I'm saying if their idea is Bruce Lee did all the work for us, we don't have to do anything other than just copy him. I don't know if there's a political classification for anybody who thinks that way. Because that is that's certainly not somebody who is looking to be creative in his own right. That's certainly not somebody who's looking to take on the personal responsibility for his own development. So I don't know if there would be a classification for them, right? In fact, again, delving for a split second into the US political context, there's a difference between a liberal and a leftist. A traditional liberal or a classical liberal or an old school liberal apparently has this much in common with a conservative. But being a leftist is something completely different. That's my understanding of it. Again, I don't know too much about US politics. I moved here 30 years ago, right? Whatever, right? So are they irreconcilable? Look, here's the thing about politicians, right? Every politician will tell you, I'm here to do the best that I can for the people. What I don't understand is that if everybody's here to do the best that they can for the people, well, why do we even have two parties? What's the difference in your or is it that we have the same philosophy, but we have different tactics and strategies? Maybe that's the answer. Maybe there really is in Jeet Kune a uniparty. Maybe concepts and original follow the same philosophies. They just have a difference in strategy and tactics. Maybe that's why the Jeet Kune nucleus ended up saying there's no difference. There's no separation. Maybe that's in keeping with Bruce Lee's philosophy himself, right? A guy who was very steeped in the yin-yang theory about stuff being complementary halves of the unified whole. And if you get that, you'll understand why my school is called Unified Martial Art Academy, but that's another topic for another time. So Cesar, there might not be anything to reconcile, except that there seems to be a ton of people who enjoy the arguing back and forth. And people might believe that I am one of those people that enjoys the arguing back and forth. I don't. I have no interest in arguing. And I'll tell you why. I was talking to Charlie, my student Charlie. Was it Charlie? No, I was talking to Bucky. right, about this yesterday. If you weren't there when Bruce Lee said or did whatever he said or did, if you weren't there, then you don't know. Now, if you hear it from somebody who said that they were there, but you cannot verify that they were there, you still don't know. If you hear it from somebody who said that they were there and it is verified that they were there, you still don't know because you're going to get it from them with their coloration put on it. So the only way really for you to know anything with 100% certainty is if you were there with Bruce Lee when he said what he said and did what he did. Everything else is reported speech. So why the hell would you want to argue and debate about stuff? And that's all I have to say about that stuff. Right? So can original concepts ever get along? Again, I can't speak for anyone but myself. And I fully intend to get to train with Mike Gittleson, Zane Isaacs, Rodney Hitchcock, Joaquin Marcelo, and Tommy Carruthers before I get too old and can't put one foot in front of the other. Now, you'll notice that those are people, except Rodney, who have been on my show. Now, why? Because I respect them as fellow JKD practitioners, and my teacher has always taught me to stay open-minded and open-hearted, right? Now, in case anybody says, hey, you didn't, I would go train with Richard Torres too, okay? I would, so I can see for myself. I'd go train with Lamar Davis, so I could see for my. Well, I've already trained with Lamar Davis, so I know where Lamar is coming from. Okay, David Collins asked, where would Bruce Lee be without James Lee? And that's hard to answer because, well, it's something that happened in the past, right? You know, James Lee heard about this whiz kid in Seattle. He went up to Seattle and found out that everything that he had heard about Bruce Lee was true, and that was the start of a friendship. And but if James Lee had never come along, who knows? Maybe Bruce Lee would have stayed in Seattle. Who knows? The fact is, he did come along. He did end up moving from Seattle to Oakland. He did end up meeting other martial artists through James Lee's connection. During that period in Oakland, the thing with Wong Jack Man happened. So Bruce Lee did get dragged into James Lee's little basa basa, as we would call it in the island, with his previous instructor, Wong, not Wong Jack Man, Wong Tim Yun, I think, I forget. All right. If James Lee had not come along, Bruce Lee might not have been introduced to book publishing, to bodybuilding, that type of stuff. So who knows, right? Bruce Lee might not have ever needed or wanted to go beyond his original Wing Chun or even his modified Wing Chun, right? So, but if we look back at what did happen, I think it's safe to say that James Lee played a role, for sure, unquestionably played a role in Bruce Lee's development. So based on that, where would Bruce Lee be without James Lee? Definitely not where he got to. Okay. That's what I would say if anybody was to ask me. All right. Okay. So, all right, we're coming up on 60 minutes, so I will start to wrap this up in case anybody has anything up the polar bear. Ken Eberly. Gabe, Gabe, that's okay, right? That better or best thing. I figured I didn't think it was intentional at all. Um, Del Mountain says nunchucks are legal to carry in Arizona. um, okay, so Mick, I don't know. I don't know at what point it is you said possible he would have been doing BJJ for definite. The reason why I don't agree, if you're talking about Bruce Lee definitely doing BJJ, the reason why I don't agree with that, Mick, one is because I don't have any evidence that he, based on Bruce Lee's behavior when he was here. Bruce Lee didn't go to anybody to train with them. People came to Bruce Lee, right? So I don't know that he would have gone anywhere to train with anybody. Just based on that, I don't think that had Bruce Lee lived, so Bruce Lee would have been 53 years old when Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu hit the scene in terms of the UFC. Now, if we open up our minds and start imagining everything, if JKD people were training in Horian Gracie's garage in the 1980s, and Bruce Lee was still around, could there have been something? See, I would never say he would definitely have done that, because I think when we do that, we're doing a little bit of presentism, and we're also imposing on Bruce Lee our own sentiments, right? We were here, and we were able to fall in love with Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and so we assume that Bruce Lee would have fallen in love with it too, but we don't really have any evidence on to back that up. So I wouldn't make it as a claim. But if Bruce Lee had lived and everything that happened in the martial art world happened exactly the way it happened, and Bruce Lee was still alive. So in other words, seminars for Dan and Asano became a thing, and Bruce Lee was still alive. So I'm gonna start all the imagining thing, right? So it's like Bruce Lee says to Dan and Asano, "Look, you're my guy. I want you to go out there and spread Jeet Kune through the seminars, because I'm too busy with the movies and what have you. But I trust you 100% to do a good job of putting my art out there." That could have happened. So Bruce Lee lived, and everything that happened in the martial art world still happened. The Karate Kid is released in 1982 or 84, whatever year it was. And all of a sudden, martial art becomes a viable alternative after school activity for the little ones. And Bruce Lee says, of course we can modify Jeet Kune to serve kids. Didn't y'all ever see me training Brandon when he was a kid? And so JKD has now Junior JKD, but don't try to use that because that's my term, right? Right? So it gets modified. The Gracies come over from Brazil, and people start to hear about them. They're in California. They hear about Bruce Lee, because remember, everything that happened in Bruce Lee's life still happened, right? It's just that he didn't die. So if the Gracies get to California in the mid 1980s, Bruce Lee is 45 years old. Okay. So they know about Bruce Lee and the phenomenon that he has been in the movies and the trail that he blazed in functional martial art and what have you. So of course they go to check him out. They go to introduce themselves to him because they are the new kids on the block. So what do you do as the new kid on the block? You go and see if you can hook up, as the cool kids say, hook up with the established entities. And so in the martial art world, who's the entity? It's Bruce Lee. So the Gracies would have gone over to him as opposed to Bruce Lee going over to them. You get what I'm saying? Right? Bruce Lee didn't go to Mike Stone's karate school. Bruce Lee didn't go to Joe Lewis's school, to Chuck Norris's school, to Luis Delgado's school. Those people came to him. So based on that, if you ask me, right, I think it would have happened that way also. But I don't know. None of us were there, right? Cesar says, Mike Tyson has said Julio Cesar Chavez had 68 victories before a loss, but his final record was 115-6-2. For that fact, his was better than Mayweather. Okay, all right, all right. Never ducked anyone, unlike Floyd. Oh man, you guys are getting in the weeds, right? Randy says JKD is JKD to me. Yeah, right. Okay, so now people are discussing the polar bear. I guess is this Varlian's guy. I don't know anything about UFC and BJJ fighters and what have you, so I plead the fifth on all that. To you and most others, it's just that really vocal minority. Yeah, Albert, which is kind of similar to the US political scene, right? There's a very, very vocal minority. They're really good. They're really, really good at kicking up a fuss and having a lot of eyes and ears, right? Having a lot of attention be placed on them. And so people believe that they must be a majority when they really are not. But they're a very vocal minority. You hit it on the head, right? Hello, Kurt Montgomery. All right. UFC was initially an infomercial for BJJ. Oh, for sure. Oh, for sure. Right. Paul McCarthy and Eric Paulson weren't allowed to enter the UFC. I've heard about that. Right. Yep. Setting up the family and not the art. More power to them. Yeah. Right. Albert Kwan. Albert, I wish I had seen. I knew what I was saying when you said like Numerato, because anytime people want to talk about Numerato, I'm there. I'm in. Right. Russell says Professor Salem was so good, beyond good. That guy, I swear. Right? The fruit basket. North South is not my favorite position. Russell, you're too funny. Right? So the best self-defense is just to stop grooming and teabag everyone. You guys are hilarious. Right? Enzo Gracie said that people smell like a dead and rotten lion on top of you. That's a grappling strategy. You guys are hilarious. We always cover 5 ways of attack at the Chicago Summit. You better, Randy. Right? If you don't have credentials under Dan Inosanto, Taki or Andy or Ted Wong, then I'm afraid I smell. No, Mick, because there's generations, so you and I would be first generation, but would be second generation, but you would also be third generation because you're under Inosanto, but you're also under an Inosanto student. So Mick, that's why you're so confused, because you occupy 2 rungs on the generational ladder, the JKD generational ladder, right? That train like water explanation was rough to listen to. Don't get me started, Russell. Right? ISIS body count. Same guys who wear a Game of Death jumpsuit at an Inosanto seminar? No, I have never seen that. I'd love to see that. Okay. Wateryu is Japanese. Okay, cool. Right? I'm not going to touch that comment, Mick. Um, I've been to Bruce Lee get-togethers and been surprised at how many fans did not know about his art and training. All right, Mark, I'm gonna lay the blame for that. I've been to Bruce Lee get-togethers and been surprised at how many fans did not know about his art and training. I lay the blame for that squarely at the feet of people who should have known better. Okay? People who should have done more to promote the art rather than letting the magazines introduce controversy into the art and then turn it into notoriety. Because I think it's the magazines that did that more so than any particular individuals. And but just like again, if we look at politics, a lot of politics in this around the world is generated and then perpetuated and fed by the great media machine. And so controversy in Jeet Kune was generated, perpetuated, and maintained by the media, the magazine media, because they know put Bruce Lee on the cover, you increase sales. Then if we can go, okay, look, here's a squabble over Bruce Lee, will probably increase sales as well. So people are drawn away from that, and instead of getting out there and promoting Jeet Kune, people argued back and forth, and the art suffered as a result. Okay, so Mick says, make the BUG great again, Mayflower Crew, QAnon, whatever. Also, differences between conservatives versus Republicans. Oh, Albert, that's going way deeper than I could ever handle, right? Show me a socialist under 25 and I'll show you what I man. Okay, all right. So I am so sorry that I brought up politics because you guys are taking it way further than I ever could. Okay, Frank Nordquist says, I look at original JKD as being like the Browning BAR machine gun. There have been advances in firearms since the bar, but the bar remains deadly effective even now. Well, I mean, as long as JKD is being trained efficiently, then whatever it is that you do, and that's the essence of it, right? So there have been advances in firearms. The bar is still effective. It's probably, even though it's still effective, it's probably outdated now in terms of technology. I don't know enough about the Browning to comment with authority, but it's probably technologically outdated, even though it's still effective. And yeah, so a punch is a punch, right? But a punch that has been trained by the advances in training methods, the scientific or technological advances. I'm not saying it's going to be more effective, but who knows? If there have been advances in how to make people stronger, if there have been advances in how to make people faster, then you might have a physically superior or even technically superior punch than a punch from the 1930s or 40s or 50s or 60s. Okay. Automobile technology is way advanced. Doesn't mean that the original A model or whatever it wasn't effective in getting people from point A to point B. But to say since the Model T, the Model A was effective in getting people from point A to point B, I want to stick to that technology. I don't know that that would be the smartest thing in the world to do. Right? Mick says, Guru championed the Gracies. I'm sure Bruce would have at least been appreciated. Oh, for sure. There's no way. There's no way he would not have been, right? Junior JKD, Mick, that's my term, right? Randy says I claim JKD juniors. Yeah, you can keep that. You can keep that, right? Inflammatory statements. Yep. Okay. All right. So, Ray McKinnon says Bruce first met Chuck Norris June 24, 67, and starts training with him on July 23rd, 67. Joe Louis becomes a student of Bruce Lee December 15th, 1967. Okay, thanks for the history lesson, Ray. Okay, hey, look, here's somebody who could have been related to me, David Wood. There was this one teacher who used to have a few drinks just so he could go get a good case of beer farts going for the seminar. Then have fun getting us in serious locks. That's hilarious, right? Both only trained with him for a short time. Bruce at time starts charging 275 per hour. Okay, all right. So listen, guys, thanks for hanging out with me. If you have anything else, go ahead and put it in the comment. I'm going to close this up now, and thank you so much for hanging out. During the week, I'll give you an update on who's going to be on the dialogues with me next Friday, and also just keep your eyes peeled. Right? Okay, guys. Thanks again. Have a great weekend. This is Dwight Woods, the Jeet Kune Rebel, signing off. Take care now.